In this video, we'll look at what we mean by the term complex sentence. So, what is a complex sentence? Well, it's one that has one independent clause or one or more dependent clauses. Now, an independent clause is one that can stand alone as a sentence, a little bit more on that in a second, and a dependent clause is one that can't stand alone as a sentence. So in this video, the independent clauses are all going to be in blue and the dependent clauses are all going to be in green. So let's look at our first example. No country can really develop unless its citizens are educated. Quote by Nelson Mandela. So you can see here, no country can really develop in blue. That could be a standalone sentence. That's an independent clause. And then appended to that in green is the dependent clause, unless its citizens are educated. So unless its citizens are educated is a dependent clause because it can't stand alone as a sentence. Now, an independent clause and a dependent clause are joined with a subordinating conjunction, and we'll look at those a little later. But in this example, unless is the subordinating conjunction. Now, the dependent clause doesn't always come second. Here's the same example with the dependent clause first. This time it starts with the subordinating conjunction. Unless its citizens are educated, no country can really develop. Let's look at another example. Your brain never stops working until you stand up to speak in public. Your brain never stops working. That could be a sentence. That's why it's in blue. It's the independent clause. And the dependent clause, until you stand up in public, here in green, starts with a subordinating conjunction, until. Remember, the sentence could start with the dependent clause. Here it is. Until you stand up to speak in public, your brain never stops working. Now, when the dependent clause is at the start, you will notice that there's a comma after it. This is a common practice, so it's obvious where the independent clause, the main clause, starts. Now, we spoke about those subordinating conjunctions. Here's a list of common subordinating conjunctions. You will see that there are lots of them. You can pause this video and have a look. Let's take one of them. If we don't change, we don't grow. So if is the subordinating conjunction. If we don't change is the dependent clause. We don't grow is the independent clause. Let's look at another one. Let's take because. My fake plants died. That's the independent clause here in blue. Because, that's the subordinating conjunction. I did not pretend to water them. The green text here being the dependent clause. So, here's a summary. A complex sentence has one independent clause. That's one that could stand alone as a sentence. At least one dependent clause, and those dependent clauses start with a subordinated conjunction, and we've got that list of those. That's all. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out some of our other videos on grammarmonster.com. You'll also find some other lessons and tests on independent clauses and dependent clauses and other types of sentences like compound sentences. You'll also find us on Twitter and Facebook.